Hello my friends, and welcome back to the Review Den, where we are covering the Wipeout games. But in order to move ahead, I'm gonna need to set the tone. I need you to imagine with me that you just had the best party ever. But then, it's the dreaded day after. The only thing left is to pinch your nose, down that black coffee, and get back to what you're good at, what's familiar. And while I can almost guarantee that's not what happened at Studio Liverpool, it is a good description for Wipeout Pure. Yes, Wipeout Pure found itself at an interesting time in the franchise history. Fusion had just brought the series onto an entirely new generation of gaming hardware, and it introduced a roster of upgrades and changes that made it appealing to a new generation of gamers. The only problem was some of those changes caused the game to stray a little bit from the core of what the series was known for. And hey, I can see some of you out there, and before anyone throws their arms in the air, that's not to say it wasn't a great game. It maintains a strong fan base, and I absolutely can see why. Fusion was a brilliantly fast and fun game, and I loved the new combat and upgrade systems. However, there were some, including the developers themselves, who felt it strayed too far from the original formula, the purity, of what made Wipeout, and so decided to bring the series back to its roots. If Wipeout Fusion was the wild blowout party, then think of Pure as the detox that was going to bring it home. Honestly, it's right in the name. This pretty much writes itself. Even better, after Studio Liverpool was kinda screwed out of a chance to make Fusion the early release it was meant to be, they now had a second chance at launch day shelves thanks to the PlayStation Portable. And seriously, if you have one of these, tell me it doesn't bring back great memories. So the stage was set for a return to form, this time with another new bit of Sony gear. Would it do the series proud, or had time passed the old school formula by? Let's find out. Wipeout Pure is, say it with me, a futuristic anti-gravity racing game with a focus on combat and a refreshed emphasis on momentum and physics. The in-game explanation has to do with magnetic lock versus self-support, but all you need to know is that there's no more scraping through the turns or sticking to the sides in banked areas. This is more old-school Wipeout, where mass is a real factor, and you'll need to practice those turns to get through cleanly. Collisions with walls or weapons carries a penalty, in the case of weapons a steep penalty, but don't go thinking this is some crushing recreation of the originals. Wipeout Pure adds some serious smoothness to the handling and track design. In fact, much like its launchmate Ridge Racer PSP, Wipeout offers analog control, and sure, it's great, but the game handles so well and so naturally, you can get by with the D-pad no problem. You never feel as if you're under or oversteering like the old games. The handling in Pure is just right, and this is all amplified by some fun track design. Yeah, there are plenty of tight turns and twisties to challenge veterans, but the tracks never become so narrow or blind, looking at you Silverstream, to feel unfair. What's really fun though is the gravity. Unlike Fusion and later games, there's no maglock in Pure, so anytime the track banks off to the side, you'll have to fight to avoid sliding downward. It becomes second nature after a while, but it really emphasizes that you're only hovering above a track, rather than glued to it. And while it was meant for Fusion, the new side slip ability comes into play. Double tapping an air brake will slide your craft to that side, and while this is good for, say, lining up power pads, it really becomes useful for perfecting your turns. If you find yourself going too wide, you can side slip to try to avoid the wall, and in time you can use this to cut corners and spend less time using traditional braking, which costs you speed. Finally, if you're willing to sacrifice some energy, you can barrel roll during jumps to boost ahead on landing, though this can be a bit tricky to pull off compared to the Omega games. Overall, if you found the early Wipeouts too raw and unforgiving, but Fusion and the Omegas too linear, Pure might just be a good balance between the two. In fact, I'll just go ahead and spoiler alert here, the sequel to Pure, Pulse, sets the tone for all the future games, so Pure right here would pretty much be the last and most refined of the momentum-style Wipeouts. Every turn, every jump reminds you that you need to compensate for your movement, yet never feels anything other than natural. It still gets a little sloppy at high speeds when weapons are knocking you left and right, but Studio Liverpool wanted an homage to their original gameplay, and this is a great final evolution of that form. But that's not to say it's 10s across the board. Combat and challenge, on the other hand, can frustrate the experience. Part of returning to the basics includes the weapon lineup, and in that sense, yeah, they hit it. This is pretty much a one-for-one with what we saw in Wipeout 2097. There's guided and unguided missiles, mines, bombs, quakes, disruptors, and plasma. The problem is the weapon effects are kind of overbearing this time. In early games, the weapons would give you a good strong speed penalty, but that was it. Going back to even Mario Kart, power-ups are made to give players a chance to pass opponents and keep the grid from being static. Formula 1, you need red shells. But in Wipeout Pure, weapons can bring you to a grinding halt. In the straights, it's okay, but weapons in any kind of turn will send you into the wall, and it takes an annoyingly long time to get your momentum back. And, of course, it never affects the AI as much as it does you. Now, maybe this was to offset the new absorb mechanic, which lets you recover energy on the fly instead of using pit lanes, but it still feels like the balance is off. It really can ruin the flow of a race if every weapon knocks you out for like 5 seconds, and all of this is compounded by the aggressive rubber band logic. Most Wipeouts play like typical arcade games where the AI starts out in front and you have to catch them. It's classic, it works perfectly. But in Pure, you can actually pass a few opponents with a perfect start, but then they'll suddenly burst ahead of you and you have to crawl back the inches. It's all just really artificial feeling, and it feels like a step back from the tough but fun AI from Fusion. Audiovisuals, however, are outstanding. Fusion was fast and smooth, but could look a bit bland at times, not so in Pure. Tracks here have plenty of bright, creative, and futuristic architecture, and special effects have been buffed as well. Sun flares, weather effects, and neon signs all fill the environment, while weapons shake and pop from the screen. The race grid has been cut from 16 back down to 8, which is disappointing, but understandable considering the hardware. And hey, did I mention Designers Republic is back? All the quirky signage and futurist tones return, as well as some slick new updates to the racecraft. The rounded, more fanciful Fifth Element style designs were neat, but these ships look like the proper modern evolution of the original Wipeout teams. At launch, Pure played at a solid 30 frames per second, which, don't let it fool you, looked a lot smoother on the PSP screen than it sounds, but modern players have some cool new tricks available. Obviously, emulation is an attractive route, but to those who have and love the original hardware, that's me, I'm raising my hand right now, you can boost the CPU clock with soft modding. Most early games used the PSP's 200 MHz processor mode to save battery life, but with the updated PSP Slims, the 2000 and 3000s, some later games used the 333 MHz clock speed for better graphics, and you can set these manually with a soft modded system. Obviously, for all legal intents and purposes, the review den does not condone piracy, but I love improving and preserving old hardware and gaming, and by using the PSP's high performance mode, Wipeout Pure runs at an impressively smooth frame rate. It's not the perfect 60 frames per second of Ridge Racer, but it targets 60, and more often than not it will be close. Now, some modes like time trials are hard-coded at 30 frames per second as the timer gets screwed up otherwise, but for all championships and single races, the majority of the game, it runs sweet. On the audio front, Wipeout sounds great, no surprises there. The weapons announcer is crisp and clear, and the weapons and boosts all have a proper modern feel to them. The soundtrack is a nice, if sometimes quirky, techno playlist which may not be up to previous game standards, at least in my opinion, but as a handheld, a portable release, it's more likely to get lost in the background noise anyway, so hey, I'll give it a pass there. And finally, we move to content, which out of the box is great, but the DLC is such a crazy story here that I'll cover it in its own video after this. Yes, Wipeout Pure may have had classic gameplay, but it was ahead of its time with extra content. And it was free, so don't get your pitchforks out. But by default, right off the UMD, Wipeout Pure has several modes, 16 tracks, and 10 craft. 8 tracks are available for the initial races, all taking place around the fictional man-made island of Makana. These range from bleak industrial zones to futuristic beach cities to suspended tracks above the clouds. Just as with Wipeout 3, the confinement to a single location does not limit the uniqueness of the Alpha and Beta leagues. They are all distinct, fantastic-looking courses. Win enough medals and you'll eventually unlock 4 classic courses, though these are rendered in a garish cyberspace aesthetic that kind of makes them unrecognizable. I read the dev team wanted to render these properly, sort of like we saw in Wipeout 3 SE, but time constraints decided otherwise. Where cyberspace does make sense is in the 4 new zone tracks. Again, you're given a unique craft and have to navigate these courses as long as possible at ever-increasing speeds. And since these inevitably end with the player's destruction, the whole simulation thing is probably a good idea. Championships, single races, and time trials are all split into 5 speed classes. Vector, just as in 2097, is a very moderate and forgiving speed, but it's perfect for learning the ropes, while Phantom is so chaotic as to be, well, admittedly kind of frustrating. Personally, I found the new Flash class to be the perfect fit for gameplay and on-the-go racing. 8 primary teams make up the roster of racers and are all nicely balanced to be useful in their own way. Triakis joins the Hot Rods but trades acceleration for maximum shields, and Harry Mao adds to the handlers but with otherwise medium stats. Hit a gold in each of the zone races to unlock that craft for standard modes, and reach a total of 70 medals to unlock the medieval ship. Yes, Studio Cambridge and Sir Daniel Fortescue got a bit of cross-promotion in the Wipeout universe with this bat-winged craft, though this certainly wouldn't be the only bit of cross-promotion. That's next. All total, there are over 140 events to podium, and each gold nets you a neat bit of artwork, just like in Fusion. All of this content could be enjoyed multiplayer over Wi-Fi, and the European version even allows you to game share a demo with your friends. Overall, Wipeout Pure is a great return to form, though I can't help but wish the developers kept some of the better elements from Fusion. Studio Liverpool wanted to bring back the feel of 2097, and in fairness, that is considered the high point of the series to many fans. Personally though, I feel like the hyper-aggressive rubber band AI, at least on the higher difficulties, and weapon impacts put a drag on what could have been the perfect balance between old and new. I love the way the game looks, and it handles great, but there are a few things modern games have done away with, probably for good reason. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and if you'd like to help a small channel grow, would you be my next subscriber? I'll be back next time with another review, and no matter what, be sure to keep going, because you are worth it.